Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Able Voices podcast. I'm Dr. Rhoda Bernard, founding managing director of the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education and the assistant chair of the Music Education Department at Berklee College of Music. And I am proud to present this podcast featuring disabled artists and arts educators. We are inviting disabled artists to be guest hosts for the Able Voices podcast. Our next guest host and today's guest is Tara Allen. Tara Allen, she, her, identifies as a queer, neurodivergent, and disabled music psychologist, music educator, advocate, and bass clarinetist. She holds a BM in instrumental music education with concentrations in instrumental wind band and bass clarinet from the Crane School of Music and an MA in psychology of music from the University of Sheffield. Her master's thesis, "The Bees Are Too Loud, ADHD'ers Sound Preferences as an Aid Daily Task Completion," focused on how ADHDers use sound and/or music to help cope with completion of mundane tasks and the combined social hardships. Her research areas of interest are neurodivergent and music perception and cognition, learning, processing, behavior, and accessible music education. She has been advocating for neurodivergent and disabled musicians through a variety of platforms since 2020. She has a podcast, Breaking the Third Wall in Music, that invites disabled and/or neurodivergent musicians to discuss disability topics in the music scene. She has spoken on the Brave New Sound and marching arts education. She has also given talks at universities, conferences, and organizations about neurodivergence. Lastly, she is a bass clarinetist and an active performer in a variety of contemporary, classical, and popular musical ensembles.
Hello, and welcome to the Able Voices podcast. I am Tara Allen, your guest host. This week, I have Andrew Dell'Antonio. Andrew Dell'Antonio is the Director of Undergraduate Studies at the Butler School of Music and the College of Fine Arts at the University of Texas at Austin, as well as a distinguished teaching professor in and head of the Butler School's Musicology and Ethnomusicology Division. He is a co-editor with William Chang of the book series Music and Social Justice from University of Michigan Press and is the co-author of the textbook The Enjoyment of Music from W. W. Norton. While his early career focused on musical traditions of early modern Europe, more recently, he has collaborated with academic and community scholars to open access for conversations about disabled and neurodivergent musical culture both inside and outside of academia. The broader goal of his collaborations is to seek practical applications of universal design for learning, UDL, to music history and higher education pedagogy from perspectives informed by critical disability studies and disability justice, as well as his own lived experiences of neurodivergence. I'd like to start off by asking you, Andrew, to tell us a little bit about your story as an artist, musician, however you identify. How did you start as an artist, and how did you get where you are today?
Thank you, Tara. It's such a delight to be here, by the way. This podcast is so much fun. I've really enjoyed listening to it, so it's an honor to be joining you. There's lots of bits to my origin story, and I don't want to drone on forever, but just to make it an elevator version of this, I'm a recorder player. That is still my main instrument. I started playing recorder like all kids in my single-digit age because my parents wanted me to learn music because, of course, one should. And for a long time, I was fiddling around on the recorder and just playing, folk tunes. And I was very proud in middle school that I could play Beatles tunes. And then we went abroad for a year. My stepdad was leading a study abroad program. And my teacher, when I got to where we were, said, "Would you like to learn music that was written for your instrument?" And I said, "What?" And so then that kind of got me into early music nerddom. So that's sort of a fast forward. I've been really interested in repertories of European musical traditions, particularly instrumental music of the 16th, 17th centuries. That's sort of where much of my early research went. I got a bachelor's as an undergrad. I still played a fair amount. I gave a couple of recitals, but I went to a program that didn't have credit for lessons, mainly because by that point I realized that, well, I didn't know that I had ADHD, but I realized that practicing was too boring. I just could not deal with practicing. I didn't have the self-discipline to really become good. I love sight reading. I loved improvising, but practicing. So I went to a program very, very thoughtfully that I was very interested in history as well. My stepdad is a historian. So I went into the family business. My family is all academics. And I thought, this is kind of cool. You get to talk about cool stuff and hang out with cool people. So I'm going to try it. So it really worked out well for me. I went to college. I got a Bachelor of Arts in Music. I went off to grad school. I got a doctorate. And then it took a little while to get a job, as it often does for those who have PhDs. So you all listening, just whatever you do, don't get a PhD in music history. No, I mean, you can, but it's tough. And academia now is sort of a mess. And we can talk a little bit about that later in terms of ableism. But I was fortunate that I landed a sweet tenure track gig at the University of Texas, Austin. And that was in 1997 in the previous millennium. And so I showed up there as a little baby musicologist, and now I've been there for 20, however heck many years. And I've somehow become the elder musicologist on staff. And so, so that's sort of where I came to music performance. That's how I always have been a musician. I identify as a musician, as a performer, as an improviser, as somebody really interested in the instrumental traditions of the 17th century, especially in Italy. You know, I don't know if you have a follow-up question about this disability piece, so maybe I hold off.
Yeah, definitely hold off. I mean, I was also very curious because Andrew, as long as I've known you, I didn't even know you were a recorder player. Like, I didn't realize that was like your primary instrument. I learned something new today.
Yeah. I've continued playing. When I first got to Texas, they're really unfortunately at a school of music that doesn't really have a really solid early music program. Schools of music have different priorities, and ours never really has had. We never really had several full-time people. So for the first few years I was there, I played fairly regularly. We had a regular sort of Bach cantata workshop, and as you may know, Bach wrote a whole bunch of his cantata movements for recorder. So when they needed a recorder player, they pulled me in. It was fun. But, like a lot of things, if you don't do it enough, you get rusty. And I still play every now and then. I still, for example, there's an intro class that I lead, and I always lead the students through some improvisatory work on round basses. But yeah, it's sort of one of these semi-well-kept secrets. I don't really do it very much anymore. There are pictures floating around of me with recorders, especially with recorders that are larger than the ones that students expect me to carry. Right. I love playing the tenor. I love playing the bass once upon a time, but the tenor is a great instrument. The alto, as you may know, is sort of the instrument for most 17th, 18th century work. Yeah. But yeah, that's me. So yeah, I should play more often, but of course I should do 1,000 things more. So yeah, anyway, that's my background.
I am curious, what is your favorite piece to play in the recorder? Like, the traditional period recorders.
Yeah. So I'll give you two pieces. One are, well, first of all, I love playing any pieces that involve ground basses. So sort of divisions, right? So the whole division flute book is good. I really enjoyed when I was younger and I could still move my fingers over the instrument really fast. I really enjoyed the Van Eyck's Flute and Lusthof, this collection of elaborations from the early 17th century. Now I actually got interested in it again because I found out that Van Eyck was blind. And so one of these days, maybe I'll go back to the piece and think about sort of the tradition of blind instrumentalists and how Van Eyck fits into it. I really loved playing Telemann solo
classic.
Suites. Yeah, Telemann is so freaking awesome. It's been a while, but I used to teach a Telemann Bach course in which by the end of the course, I was hoping the students to realize that Telemann was actually a better composer than J.S. Bach. Not, in different ways, but really, really phenomenal pedagogue, phenomenal composer. So Telemann is sort of like, it's a chestnut. I've enjoyed playing, back when there's this fabulous, you probably know, this fabulous concerto that Telemann wrote for E minor, right, for recorder and flute. And in college, that was one of my recital pieces, and it's a bear, and it's a lot of fun to play. And yeah, now I couldn't play it anymore, but it was fun.
Thanks for sharing, Andrew. Like I said, I feel like I learn something new every day when we have a chat. My next question for you is, I'd like you to tell us about your experiences as a neurodivergent person and musician.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's, what's interesting to me is I didn't officially identify as neurodivergent until about 7 years ago. My diagnosis of ADHD came in my mid-50s. But yeah, I've been a neurodivergent all my life, right? So I think what I mentioned earlier about practicing insight reading, I now realize that my difficulty in certain kinds of practicing came precisely out of the fact that my brain just gets so bored with it. And on the flip side, my ability to improvise and to sort of be present with improvisation, I think, comes in part from the way my brain works and the way I enjoy throwing stuff together and playing with stuff. Language as well. And another, I guess connected to this is I was born in Italy. I came to the States when I was 9. I've been exposed to a lot of languages as a little kid, so I can work around pretty, several Romance languages. And so playing with language is something that we did at home all the time and that I like to do. And so that's also part of this whole improvisatory thing in my mind. I think the other piece that I've become aware of more recently in collaborating with a colleague of mine who is an independent scholar who's autistic is how certain kinds of musical training were difficult for me. And again, now probably because of the way my brain works. So for example, I really, really struggle with keyboard skills. In fact, to this day, I cannot play the keyboard to save my life. And my college training was such that I managed to get out of college without keyboard skills. The program was that way. I get to grad school and I had to demonstrate keyboard skills by the time I got to candidacy. And that was tough. I mean, people who helped me do that, they were saints. Because it was just like, no, the brain does not compute two hands doing same play, even though, of course, I'm using two hands to play my instrument, right? So I think there's a variety of aspects. I think another piece of it is, and maybe part of the reason why I gravitate towards either very early or more recent music, is that I don't have as much long range listening skills, even though I was technically trained to be able to, listen to a Mahler symphony or a Bruckner symphony. I just can't. And it's really hard for me to keep that attention going. Again, it's sort of an attention thing. So I think that's part of it. And in all this, that's sort of where my teaching then has gone. That I've become increasingly realizing that certain things are hard to keep track of. I've always had trouble memorizing things, for example, which is bad for a historian. But you know what? Not really, because historians don't just memorize things, right? They put things together. And so this is sort of thinking about how do I make things accessible to students in my classes, particularly music history, but even, talking about for non-majors, how do you start thinking about larger scale forms, in sort of listening for and making sense of large scale forms, because I came up with strategies that, work. And in fact, that makes sense. But I had some friends in grad school who were like, oh, Bruckner, my God, my most best favorite. And I would shrug. I was always trying to be nice.
I definitely understand. I think that's the struggle as a teacher. Like I used to be one, so I understand. I know you started talking about it a little bit earlier about like some of those difficulties that you experience in academia as an ADHDer and as a neurodivergent person. I feel like this kind of feeds into the original question, but kind of in a different way of like, yes, our musicianship is our performance, but for a lot of us who are also researchers as well, which myself included, there is a different level of experience as a neurodivergent and disabled person in music academia. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think part of it is, the way ADHD manifests for me, because I grew up in an academic context, because I was coached on how to be an academic, I think differently from some of my friends who did not have academic families, I had a lot of support in my family, so I came up with strategies. So in a way, I attributed the difficulties that I had to just, I got to work a little harder, right? So the whole, you should try a little harder is absolutely a refrain that has accompanied me my whole life. And I was always a perfectly fine student, but I was never an A student. And again, arguably I've actually done better in the long run than some of my colleagues who were A students. And so there's a whole question of what, is being an A student really everything that it's hashed up to be? I mean, whatever. But certainly in terms of certain kinds of standard academic performance, test taking, memorization, and even certain kinds of large scale planning, that is tough. It's tough. It's tough. Again, coming now from an instructor perspective, I have a little more authority to say, hey, 14 weeks is a random number, right? There's no reason why you should learn things over 14 weeks in a semester. And I have the authority a little bit to say, I'm going to give you extensions because if you don't learn over 14 weeks, it's not your fault. It's the fault of the arbitrary 14 weeks. So I think that's part of it for me too, is that particular timings, right? I mean, one of the ways my ADHD manifests and has always manifested is a sense of time that is non-standard, right? I mean, a lot of ADHD people have that, right? And so getting late to things, right? And such, on the flip side, I'm pretty good at knowing exactly how long 50 minutes is because I've gotten the practice of, okay, I teach a 15-minute class. And so I'm pretty good at ending class on time as long as I'm not, going off on my tangent, which sometimes I do. But so I think that's it. Now, on the other hand, I encountered a lot of instructors, faculty who were also neurodivergent. I mean, it's, one of these dirty secrets of academia is that it is actually a very good place in some ways for especially male and straight, right, and whites, and neurodivergent academics, because we're just a quirky professors, and pat me on the head, and there you go, and off you go. So that's part of it, is that I think I managed to get myself to a field that valued my differences, where in fact, just like Philip Brett says about queerness, is, if you are musical, or if you're, whatever, you are, odd, but we accept you as a musician. I think there are a lot of us in this field. And again, there's a whole question, of course, of, what is neurotypical or not, and we could go down that rabbit hole forever. But I think that's part of it too, is that the different ways of being have both been difficult for me, but also I was able to build up in strategies. The way this manifested for me was such that, again, I was able to not know it. I mean, I had diagnosed anxiety since forever, at least since grad school, probably since before then.
It's such an ADHD pre-diagnosis.
Right. Exactly. And in the end, right, it's the, I got to build strategies, otherwise everything's going to fall apart, right? So that mindset is there. But if you build the strategies, then it's just anxiety, giving you panic attacks from time to time. But then when life changes, so in my situation, I got older, as my doctor at the time said, I got benign senescence. This is a term I want to recommend to everybody. It's when you get old, but it's okay. So it's not, it's not malignant senescence, right? So you get a little older and your brain changes, because that's what happens. And as it turns out, as your brain changes, some things might become more visible. And so that's sort of how it played out for me. Partly it was because, people started noticing certain things, but partly because, frankly, it was happening more often and it had more responsibilities. So that I dropped more balls. When you have more balls, you drop more balls. So I think a lot of that was, managing, coping, telling myself I got to work harder, people telling me I got to work harder, being successful enough that, okay, I can deal with this even though I'm a little anxious, and then realizing, well, wait, this thing that is happening in my brain is happening to all the other people, and therefore, how can I embrace it and work with it, as opposed to trying to pretend that everything's okay and I'm not struggling with certain kinds of things.
The neurodivergent experience of masking is so real.
For real, right? And sometimes you don't even know that you're masking, right?
Yeah,
right,
a lot
exactly.
of people don't know.
Right. I mean, I talk to a lot of people. Right, exactly. I talk to a lot of people. It's like, I mean, you're coping, right? And the coping means adapting to neurotypical norms. Right now, we know. But back then, when you haven't had the framework, you're like, you're coping because that's what quote unquote normal is. Now, thankfully, we know normal is sitting in the dryer, and we can call people normate and insult them for pretending to be normal. So that's kind of fun.
Every day. The next question is, I know our listeners would like to hear about the arts education you received. I know you talked about it a little bit, but can you tell us about how you studied the arts and how you continue to learn today?
Yeah. So I did, I'll say I started, I mentioned this idea of learning the music for my instrument. So that was really the beginning of thinking of what I did as something really creative, right? Not just playing tunes. I went in Italy. There have been for a long time these summer workshops in this lovely town called Urbino, on top of a hill in central Italy, where you do early music for 2 weeks, like continuously, wall to wall, freaking early musicians. It was a blast. And so I went to those about 3 times when I was in between high school and college. And so that was sort of a deep introduction. Then, while still finishing high school, the director of the early music ensemble at a nearby college was a great mentor to me. And we sort of talked about, okay, what is this all about? How does one do this? I did end up going to a liberal arts college because I thought I was going to major in psychology. I took my first psych test. I got a C. And I said, I'm not doing this, right? Because I had to memorize all this stuff. It's like, what the hell? But thankfully, I'd also enrolled in this sort of intense music parallel thing. And so I dove into music from there. And so then, I was a fancy undergraduate, Ivy League undergraduate college. I don't want to sort of throw names around. But anyway, I was there. It went well. I was a B+ student. I did good. Grad school, California, Berkeley, wonderful place. A lot of really great musicians, a lot of great historians, people who really understood where music was going, right? Music and its history was going. So that's where I really went deeply into the idea of being a music historian. So I kept playing, but I wanted to be a historian. And that's how my learning happened. And that's how it's continued to happen, because I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by a lot of people when I was younger, people who were older, who were sort of, cage rattlers, right? Who were shaking things around a bit and didn't allow me to be complacent in thinking, what does it mean to do this work? And then more
Mhm.
recently, even better, people younger than me who are fabulous cage rattlers and who are saying, hey, you can't just sit back and keep doing the work you're doing because we need to include more people. We need to make sense of more things. We have been telling stories that are very limited and that then leave people out. Right. So that's been, I mean, telling stories, my mom was an early childhood education person. My stepdad's a historian. People told stories all the freaking time around me. My grandma was a great storyteller. So I've just enjoyed the idea that we tell stories, but we tell stories with a purpose. We have different reasons to tell stories. And what the facts are that we tell stories with are actually really interesting because they're never really solid. And in music, they're especially cool because there's so much interpretation happening. So that's another reason why I really love working with early repertories because there's so much, flexibility. I mean, some people say, oh, well, you got to play Bach, with the original instrument. But then that's, when I was younger as a scholar, the number of people in the early music scene were really, really keen on that. Y'all in the Boston area. I mean, I got my own recorder from the Fahuna workshop, so I know, I know the high level nerdiness in Boston early music, and it's great stuff there. But even again, let's say 1970s when I was really young, people were saying there's a right way to play Bach. And now people are saying, well, there's many ways to play Bach, and actually, if you use these things to play Bach, it sounds different, and it opens up possibilities, and that's what I love. So that's what I love to bring to my saxophone students and tell them, because they'll come in and say, well, Bach never wrote anything for the saxophone. And I said, well, that didn't stop him from arranging things for everything under the sun. And saxophones are really cool instruments. And so what can you do with a saxophone with this piece? Because Bach would have asked you the same thing. Bach wouldn't have been satisfied to say, well, I'm sorry, you can only play this piece on a flute or on a violin or where the heck. And so that then opens up the possibility of claiming the music for yourself. So I guess that's a long way to say, the notion of making it yours and helping people make it theirs and being excited and learning from other people. I mean, one of the coolest things about teaching, I find, is every year I have a new crop of people who can tell me new things. And, and I'm technically telling them things, but, they're telling me a lot more things than I'm learning. And in the end, having that dynamic, telling students that they are authorities, right? That they don't need to feel like they don't know anything, but they are, people who have knowledge and who can keep building knowledge. That's been fun too, because it gives a different dynamic than I got. I mean, I had good instructors, but a lot of what I got was, here are the facts. You will learn the facts now, right? And that stuff I coped with it, but it just, bleh. And so once I had latitude to not do that so much, then it's been actually more and more fun as time has gone along. So I've gotten less and less, specific. I know that's the wrong word. Less and less sort of determinate in my teaching because I realize if I give students agency, they're going to do a lot more fun things and they'll be more fun for me. Because, my God, if I have to make people learn dates, first of all, I can't learn dates. And second of all, I know the freaking dates. And so why should I take so much time doing that when, this is the other thing, granted, I realize I'm sort of ranting here, but one of the things I decided to do, and maybe this was sort of, if you want to talk a bit about this whole EDL-ish thing, might get us into this, is a few years back, I've been teaching our first semester on music history sequence for majors for a very long. And I registered that most of our students, maybe a semester, 2 semesters later, remember almost nothing about what they had studied. And that felt, on the one hand, I could have gone and said, how do you dare? You scallywags, you should have studied better. But thankfully I went, oh, shoot, that was a waste of time for them. Right? What and for me, and okay, so how are we going to fix this? And so that's what I've been trying to do ever since is, can we make, it can be hard for students to relate to music from a very long time ago. I get it. Every year we get a few nerds who are really into it and then some who aren't. It's okay. So I'm not going to take it personally anyway, but can we make this worth everybody's time? Because you guys, students are paying money and they're doing things and they're being told, oh, you should be practicing here instead. And why you should go to silly music history where you're going to memorize this crap and then you never use it again. If that's the way that we move into it, then yeah, what the heck am I even doing? So it's actually more fun for me to try to figure out how can this music that I love so much, how can I get people to love some of it, and to love the fact of talking and telling stories about music, which is really ultimately, we need to be able to tell stories about our music and we need to know what the ethics of telling stories are. And that's what I really care a lot about.
Yeah. I think you brought up a really good point earlier about giving agencies to students, as teachers, that's a really big part of our job, is providing them the tools to kind of create their own agency. But then also, like, as you were talking about it, you're like, I'm learning from them through their own agency. And I remember when I was, training to be a teacher, I literally remember a teacher just looking at me and going, kind of in a similar tone of like, just because you're the teacher doesn't mean you're not going to learn anything from your students, because they're going to teach you a lot of things that you thought you knew, but you didn't know.
Right.
And it's very true.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think part of it is, and this is a more recent sort of thing that I've focused on, tried to learn more about this whole UDL, design for learning frame, is sometimes, certainly students have insights on things, right? And frankly, 4-year-olds have insights on things, but certainly 19 to 23-year-olds, who are the people who I deal with most of the time, have a lot of insights and thoughts. And sometimes they haven't thought a lot about it and they deserve to think more, but sometimes, they've thought a lot about it, and it's sort of helping them to tell the difference between the things that are just knee-jerk reaction based on their bias and stuff they've actually thought about. So that's really important too. But another thing is, some things that make sense to me because I've learned in a certain way may not make sense to somebody else if I try to help them learn them the same way. Because, because every brain is different and people have different ways of learning things. And so that's something that I've really thought a lot about. And again, I've drawn a lot on students to help me figure that out. Oftentimes there's students who have accommodations, sometimes not. But the student will say, hey, I really can't make sense of it this way. But, in a different class, I made sense of this thing that way. Do you think we could do it that way? And I say, well, that's cool. Sure. Why not? And then I have a new tool that I can pass on to the next students, whether or not they have disabilities officially, whether or not, because tools are good. You want to have many tools, because having only one tool, unless it's a multi-tool, you can't do that much with it. If everything, everything's a nail, right? If you only have a hammer. Whereas if you have many different tools, then maybe I can go back with on the music that I think I know something about, and I know something about, but I can know more about it because this student has given me a tool to make sense of it myself. So yeah, that's, again, it's not absolutely what your teacher says spot on. It's in the classroom for sure. But it's also the kind of renewal that we can get as instructors is there's fresh ideas, as long as, again, we can set up that dynamic where students feel comfortable trying things, not worried about getting it wrong. This is something that maybe you've encountered this too, but I really struggle with these days because of the way a lot of students are trained in K through 12. They come to college and they have a lot of trouble being curious, right? They just want to know what's right for the test, so they get the test right. And when I tell them, we don't have any tests in this class, I don't want to say they freak out. It's good not to have tests, but then they start thinking, okay, wait, so how am I supposed to know what's right and what I'm supposed to tell you? And that's when they find out that they're not supposed to know that. They're supposed to figure out what they think is right rather than what I think is right. But it's, again, it's wonderful for some students. It's very hard for others. And so this idea of how can I then meet the students halfway who've had curiosity, crushed out of them because of the standardized testing K through 12. Because if you have no idea of how to build your curiosity, then you are going to kind of have the cereal aisle thing in front of my options and say, well, I can't even choose which cereal to eat because there's so many of them, right? So I can't choose what option I want to take because there are too many options. Tell me which one I need to take. So the strategy of how do you help people gradually become comfortable with options is one that I've had to learn myself, right? They initially thought, oh, cool, I'm giving all the options because that's what I want. But no, I'm not everybody's me. So that's a great learning opportunity for me.
100%. I agree. As we've heard, you are very active as a musician in a variety of ways. I see it myself through the group that you have, the musicology group and disability group. Can you tell us a little bit about your current work and some of the initiatives and things that you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. What's kind of cool, and again, not to ramble on about this, I'm very good at rambling on, by the way, so stop me. But my research used to be defined as me writing articles, publishing books. That's how we musicologists define research success, career, all that kind of stuff. And that is still valuable. What's been super awesome is, as I haven't need to demonstrate my skills in the area because of how I've advanced professionally in my field, I've been able to do more stuff that I kind of wanted to. I do what I want, as Cartman would say. So for example, I've been doing a lot of collaboration. I was trained to be an independent, gotta do my own research, and you can't be plagiarizing, yada yada. So I'm doing this fabulous collaboration with a colleague in theater and dance. They're the head of our theater and dance group, and we got a bit of funds from a university to come up with a series of initiatives to look at the syllabus as a document of community. So not as, if you don't show up, you get an F, but setting guidelines collectively on what is ethical and what is viable for the community, right? Accountability is really important. Showing up for each other is really important. And, any musician or performing artist who goes out after school knows that if they don't show up for their ensemble, then their ensemble tanks. So it's important to be accountable, but also, academia often has these artificial guidelines that says, well, if you're absent twice, then you get a grade down or whatever, right? And so a lot of people say, well, people got to learn that, in the real world, but in the real world, people take care of each other. You just need to be accountable. So we've been talking about what does that mean, both with colleagues. This year, we're working with graduate students who are instructors to just figure out how do you set a class up like that through a syllabus, but then how do you continue conveying that message? So that's been a super cool initiative. Another really fabulous initiative that, again, is a collaborative initiative that you sort of mentioned is this initiative connected to our study group, our National Society, the American Musicological Society, has a number of study groups. And I've been involved with the Music and Disability Study Group for a while. But for the first time this sort of academic year, I'm one of the co-leaders. And, with a couple of really, really brilliant younger scholars. I mean, I'm just in awe of them. It's so awesome to work with them because they have so much energy and hope. And it's like, it almost helps little jaded old me, like, believe something can be changed. But anyway, so one of the things that we've done that we're really proud of is while the society interest group is within the society, and so it's only available technically to those who join the society, we have a community of practice that one of my colleagues, Rena Roussin, who's finishing her doctorate at Toronto, if I remember correctly, in Canada, she said, let's have a community of practice because one of the big things that we care about is access, right? I'm sure you've been talking. I mean, I know you've been talking a fair amount about this. So how do you provide access to people if you put things behind paywalls, if you put things behind societies, if you only can allow people to engage with something if they show up to a national conference with expensive hotels, then you don't give access. And so we've been really nudging our powers that be to really provide more access. And, with limited success, we're still working on it. But we said, the heck with this, we can make our own access. I have the privilege of being able to host Zoom meetings. I have the privilege of being able to compensate someone who would do CART for us, the automatic transcription. Is actually a person who has worked with Galen Lee, so who has real sort of disability cred, and so twice a semester-ish, we say to our community, we send email out to people connected to our society, but also who have gotten to know about us. We say, hey, we're getting together on date X on Zoom. Show up. We're going to have CART. We're going to record it. Come join us. Let's talk about these things. We have sometimes we have presentations by people. Sometimes we just talk about stuff that's interesting to us. For example, in fact, we have just decided that the second half of this December's meeting is going to be a tribute to Alice Wong, who just recently passed away, as you might have noticed. And so it's this, but it's a y'all come thing, as they say in Texas. I'm from Italy. I grew up in the Northeast. But I have learned to say y'all. So y'all is useful. That's something that Massachusetts got to figure out. So you got to figure out y'all from Massachusetts. But anyway, so it's a everybody's welcome. It is free. It is on Zoom. We ask people for their access needs beyond CART. And some people have said, well, I would like to have materials in advance because reading them in advance would be helpful. And we try to do that as much as we can. I have one colleague who is amazing, and her access need that she is incredibly courageous to put out there is, I'm an academic, but I don't want people to be critical of what I have to say. And this is sort of the opposite of the idea, well, academia, people are supposed to be beating up on you. But she says, given my disability, I get flares if I get anxiety. And ain't that going to happen to me? And so if you want to be in conversation with me, have to find a way to help to give me feedback in ways that is not right. I mean, she doesn't use the word mean, but because she can absolutely take constructive feedback, but she's learned that the standard feedback people get in academic contexts is, jerks. And people are jerks to her, and her flares go up, and she can't function. And she said, I'm not gonna play that game. It is such a courageous thing. And honestly, when she puts it out there, everybody shifts, right? Everybody in our community shifts because it's like, yes, access is important. And frankly, why be a jerk? Why be a jerk to somebody? It's amazing how people don't stop to think that. So all this to say, that's the thing I love because again, the first time that she mentioned this to my president, I thought, what, wait, what? How can you even function that way? But it works because you ask for it. And so I love to be surrounded by people who know how to self-advocate, and so I can learn. So then I can set that up for myself. I can tell students, hey, I have this colleague who wants this. We're going to do this now, right? Let's see what happens if our feedback is only supportive. What? But yeah,
Just like,
it
what
works.
is this?
What is this? Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so those are a couple of things that I'm doing. The things that I'm most proud of are those. They are sort of collaborations with people, which may or may not eventually result in anything written. I mean, I've written a lot of stuff. I don't need to prove to anybody that I can write anymore. Now I can collaborate and I can support people in ways that I find really meaningful, and it's a joy. It's a real fun.
Because I've gone to a few of the meetings, but I know people who are listening. What are some of like the type of topics you talk about in these music and disability meetings?
That's a great question. So, for example, our first one, our pioneering one, there was a substantial conference about a year ago about a very famous blind pianist named Maria Paradis, who was Wolfgang Mozart's contemporary, was involved with early Braille experiments, all sorts of cool stuff about Paradis. And so there was a conference about Paradis, and we were really interested in having the person who organized it come to us because she organized it as a hybrid conference. It was very accessible. And our society is saying, well, we can't possibly make things hybrid. And this person, boom, she went and made one. And so it's like, okay, come tell us how you did it. So part of her presentation was, this is how we did it. And this is how we can keep doing it. So that was one. At this latest meeting, there were two short papers by grad students. One was about music therapy in autistic students in the 1950s. And it was brutal, awesomely brutal, because the presenter was autistic. And he was like, this stuff is crap. This is terrible, and let's think about how it still underpins a lot of what music therapy is today, right? So it's one of these, right? So it was a content-based research paper from the 1950s. The other one was this really, really interesting analysis by a composer theorist of a piece by Molly Joyce, who's a contemporary disabled composer, and it was a read on this piece about disability, about access, actually, and it was a really, really, really interesting read. Those were a couple. In December, we're going to be. A conversation can be led by one of our colleagues who used to be one of the leaders of the group, a gentleman named Stefan Honisch, talking about terminology of disability identity and how that is useful in various ways to different people and how we might make sense of it with each other and for each other and for our students. So some of it is sort of very practical, how we're going to do the things. Some of it is, here is this particular historical moment in disability. But a lot of it is like, let's see who shows up and we can talk about what people want to. I mean, we are really, really, really keen to draw people from all corners because one of the things, and again, to really briefly touch on this, some of my best collaborators, one of them is Steph Band. So hi, Steph, I hope you're listening to this. Steph is an independent scholar, got a degree in history from Chicago, and has been publishing in disability history, music disability, queer studies, as a non-academic. She's a scholar, but she doesn't have an academic job. And that is awesome because so often there's so much gatekeeping about who can speak about things that are important, right? Only people who speak certain languages can speak, can talk fancy musicologist talk. And I was trained as that person. And now I'm trying to untrain myself. And I'm trying to help my own students think about the various different ways to communicate with people. Because, musicology can often be extremely off-putting in terms of jargon and so forth. And so how do we talk about important things in ways that are accessible? So that's a big piece of what we talk about. So we want people there who will help us be accountable to the community, not just talking to each other as academics, but to be accountable across the community of disabled folks and neurodivergent folks and musicians who care about disability as a topic. So in the show notes or whatever, if you want to look us up, we're musicdisability.org, musicdisability, the two words put together.org. I think that's correct. But in any case, you can put it in the show notes because that's what podcasts do. So whatever.
Yeah. And I can say as someone who's attended these meetings, I feel they're always very fruitful. They're always very engaging. And there's always people who always have a very vast amount of different opinions that I feel that everyone is so respectful of those opinions. And they're always willing to listen and learn, which is great. So I can't really push it enough on how great it is.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. And if folks are so interested in how they are, our very first meeting is currently on the website. We recorded it back in April. Our second meeting, which is in September, October, I can't remember now. If, a month or so ago, a month and a half ago, I'm still cleaning up the captions because what we do is we have the cart, but then I go in on principle and make sure the captions are correct. And so that should be up soonish. There'll be a third one that actually may get kicked up first because this was what we just did at our national meeting. The National Society kind of refused to stream our show, so we streamed it ourselves. Ha! And then recorded it. And so now, in fact, one of our leaders, so let me just put this plug in, our leader, Elizabeth McLean, who isn't currently at the, leading our group, but has led a group before, and she's a scholar at Virginia Tech, an amazing scholar of music and disability, but also gaming and all sorts of cool stuff. She gave a really great presentation, partly about her work with a particular cultural center in Minneapolis called the Cedar, but partly about what does it mean to do music and disability in academic contexts? Is it just studying disabled musicians, or how can we be accountable to disabled people in the music scholarship that we do? So it was a great, great presentation. So I want to get up there as soon as possible because it's like, yeah, Elizabeth. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, you sit with people and you talk and you bitch about things and you say, damn it, people should say these things. And then she went and said it like super well in a very coherent way. And it's like, thank you, Elizabeth. Now we can start boosting it everywhere but loose. So that's, we hope to have that up on our website as well. Again, we have this website is for our study group and our society, but there's a tab in the website that's community of practice, which is where we put the recordings. And we also put the forthcoming, so this December meeting, we have a, I can't remember if we put up a Zoom link there yet, but anyway, we would have a Zoom link up there soon. And we have a place where we say, hey, if you want more information, click here, give us your email address. We have an email list that goes on. It goes old school, well, semi-old school email list that just, barfs out information every few months and with Zoom links and all sorts of good stuff. So yay.
Yay. You talked about it a little bit with, the Dismos website, but can you tell folks where they can follow your work online?
You betcha. Well, so a great friend of mine who actually is also in music and disability community helped me build the website. And so it's A Dell'Antonio, ADELLANTONIO. I think I'm .com. I think that's what I did because .com. Anyway, that honestly, that's the best place to go. If you're a boomer like me, or even if you're not a boomer and you're still on Facebook, I'm on Facebook. I put a lot of stuff in public on Facebook. Anything I put public is free for the things. Follow me, connect with me. I used to be on what's called X, and then I just gave up because I just couldn't. And I haven't been able to get my head around Instagram that well. I do have Blue Sky, but I'm on there. So I'm really, I'm a young boomer, right? I'm 1963, so that counts as boomer. So I embrace my boomerhood and I get on Facebook. So if anybody is on Facebook, is interested in following me, I'm there. But my website has a bunch of things about my work, part of it about my research. All my classes are up there as Google Docs because that's another access piece I'm really, really keen about. I want students to be able to see, what kind of things I do, but also people who might want to teach things that are similar to what I do. I mean, I know that, in the before times, before there was as much of an internet as there is now, I used to get syllabi from friends all the time, and I poached and I sent, and so there were, you used to be able to find things, but it was harder. Now, my point is, okay, Google Docs are great. Put everything up in a Google Doc because why not? I mean, if we don't share, then we don't get stuff done. But thank you, Tara. Yeah, I mean, if you're, and there's a contact form on there, but I'm always happy to be contacted. And if I don't answer your email right away, it's probably because I got distracted, or it might be because I'm grumpy and I don't feel like emailing you that day. But I try to be nice.
That's fair. I definitely feel that persona sometimes, for sure, Andrew. The last question is, what advice would you give to young neurodivergent and disabled artists?
Yeah, get into community. I know that you have said this, Tara, so I'm sorry. I'm sort of, repeating what, I mean, honestly, as someone who joined the disabled community late-ish, I joined the disabled community partly through my parenting status. Both my kids are autistic. And so that was where I learned, and I got my head, turned around 6 times, and I got called in really usefully about my ableism, frankly. And then I was well primed to actually say, okay, wait, me too. And therefore, what can I do here? So much is about community. So much is about not feeling alone. I mean, honestly, this is about any young musician, right? Regardless of divergence, regardless of neurology. I mean, the sense that you are alone in the practice room, that is just one of the hardest things, and making sure that you surround yourself with people who get you. And then they can connect you with other people who might get you. And then as those networks expand, one of my things that I've noticed is that the disabled community is a very welcoming space. I mean, there are speed bumps, but by and large, if you are going into the disabled community, you will find people who can support you, who will say, yeah, I get it, who will say, here's a strategy. That's the best thing. I mean, there are, as much as possible in institutions and high schools and colleges, there are disability services centers, and some of those folks are doing much more than they have to, because all they're supposed to do is keep the university nose clean. It's the compliance office. And so a lot of those folks are frustrated because they have to just do the minimum. We are blessed at University of Texas. In many ways, things are complicated here, but we're blessed by having a disability cultural center. So if there's anything like a disability cultural center at university, or for example, there's this fabulous one in San Francisco that does a lot of public things. So, Google Disability Cultural Center in San Francisco, they are another piece of community. So much community can be online. Frankly, much of my community these days is online. And it's not worse than in-person community. Don't let anybody tell you that, relationships that you build online are worse, because Tara and I have never met in person. And we trust each other deeply. Right. So whatever. But I would say, community is really job one, and also trying through community to realize that you're not, it's not about you, right? That, we have difficulties. Everybody has difficulties. You have difficulties of a certain sort because the system is not built to accommodate you. And you deserve to be accommodated. You deserve to be supported. You deserve to have the system change so that you don't need accommodations, but the system is built, right? That's the whole thing behind the universal design, is you build so that you don't need to retrofit. And that's a long-term thing. But I guess the other thing that I was mentioning earlier is there's so many of us, right? There's so many of us undiagnosed, unacknowledged, but increasingly diagnosed and acknowledged. 20 years ago, we had just as many neurodivergent people in music, but nobody was out or nobody was acknowledged. Now, more and more people are. More people are embracing the reality of who they are as disabled and neurodivergent. And that is good. There are people out there that you can follow, that you can connect with. And, of course, connect with Tara, because Tara is awesome and a badass. And honestly, you're the host, I got to say this. But seriously, I have to say, it's really interesting for me as someone who engaged with music and disability when it was sort of coming into academic circles. And it was a scholarship about disabled musicians. And it was not about identity. It was about, let's study this disabled thing. And now, this is actually one of the things Elizabeth says so well in this presentation I told you about. And now it's like, no, a lot of younger scholars are saying it's about activism, it's about politics, it's about identity, it's about everything. And nothing about us without us, right? And so that really is, figure out who the us is. That it's got to be about. It's about you, and it's about the others who are both like you and not like you. Read the 10 Principles of Disability Justice by Cindy Valid, because they talk about this idea of cross-disability organizing, and about, frankly, those 10 things, those 10 principles, if our younger musicians, scholars can read them and say, wow, I want a world like that, then you can work towards it. And there's some of us around who can help you.
I agree. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I'm sure people will definitely take that advice with them, whether they accept it at first or not. Takes time. Takes time. Lots of unlearning, lots of learning.
Lots of unlearning. Yep. The older you are, the more you unlearn. But honestly, if you can embrace the idea that unlearning is actually just as fun as learning, it's tough because it means that you are wrong. And so many of us overachievers have to be right.
But it's okay to be wrong.
But it's more than okay to be wrong. In fact, if you can learn to be wrong, then that's where you achieve. That sounds very pat, but it is true. Once I learned that it was fine to screw up, to be wrong, to be corrected by somebody, that's where things really started getting fun. So good luck, everybody. It is hard to be wrong if you feel like you don't have a lot of power to change things, but there are people around you who can help you. And again, follow 100%. Tara. Come check out my stuff if you want. I don't bite if you're not food. Thank you all. Thank you, Tara, for having me. It's been a lot of fun talking.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Andrew. And like I said, I feel like every time we talk, I learn something new from you.
Likewise.
Which is my favorite part of our conversations.
Excellent.
Listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm sad to say this will be my last episode hosting Able Voices as the guest host. Rhoda will be back next week, but thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed these last few episodes.
Able Voices is a production of the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education, led by me, Dr. Rhoda Bernard, the founding managing director. It is produced by Daniel Martinez del Campo. The intro music is by Kai Levin, and our closing song is by Sebastian Batista. Kai and Sebastian are students in the arts education programs at the Berklee Institute for Accessible Arts Education. If you would like to learn more about our work, find us online at berkeley.edu/BIAAE or email us at BIAAE@berkeley, that's LEE.edu.